Hello there, amazing visionaries. This is Lorna Liana, and I'm here today with Rak Razam, who is a leading experiential journalist who enjoys writing about and helping shape the emergence of a new cultural paradigm in the 21st century. He is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Aya Awakenings, a shamanic odyssey, and also the companion volume of interviews called The Ayahuasca Sessions, which you can check out at www.ayathebook.com. That's www.ayathebook.com. He is a frequent lecturer on ayahuasca and the shamanic revival that is sweeping the West. He wrote, produced, and co-directed the groundbreaking new visionary documentary Aya Awakenings, which you can check out at www.aya-awakenings.com, and he leads ayahuasca retreats in Peru. If you want to find out more about these retreats, you can check out www.aya-awakenings.com/retreats. And so I'm really overjoyed to have Rak Razam with us today because we're going to talk about this shamanic revival in the West that I find so intriguing. So before we dive into that conversation, I'd love to ask you, Rak, what exactly is shamanism for the benefit of those people out there listening who don't know?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, it depends on who you ask, I guess, these days. If you asked indigenous peoples all around the world, they would say that the practice of shamanism is equivalent, I guess, to a medicine person. And the role that a shaman used to play and still plays in some indigenous tribes around the world is basically that of a healer. It's a healer that may work through different modalities like trance and dance, but largely it has been healers that work with medicinal plants and herbs and things like that. The Western anthropological understanding of shaman has quite eroded over the decades, and by the 1950s, what the word shaman was being based upon was an understanding of Siberian shamanism, and we've basically, in the West, appropriated the term shamanism and exported it back onto the medicine people of the world. And, you know, the majority of medicine people across the world don't call themselves shamans. In Peru, they call themselves curanderos. That's from the Spanish, it means to heal. There might be brujos or sorcerers. There might be taters. Every region has their own language for it. But essentially, it's men and women across the world who are in service to their communities and are healing people. And that might be with medicinal plants, but it also works on a spiritual level where sometimes they are responsible for sort of the spiritual well-being of the tribe as well. And so in the West, we have largely forgotten this. And we have glorified the term shaman, and because of the absence of that archetype in our culture, basically because Western culture eradicated the medicine people over many hundreds of years, we have to some level glorified this archetype, and it's become to mean a little bit more of a mystical sorcerer, wizard, sort of Hollywood archetype, which we're relearning. We're relearning what that means in Western culture.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when I spend time with indigenous healers and plant medicine people in the different tribes that I've gotten to know in the Amazon regions. I've been to Peru and Ecuador and Brazil. It's interesting how they refer to themselves as shamans just to be understood by Westerners. Even though, you know, it's not, as you mentioned, it's not really a traditional term for them. It was co-opted from the Siberians. I'm curious to know, in terms of your research of the topic, why do you think ayahuasca shamanism is so popular now?
Well, it's a very good question, and there are many different plant entheogens. The word entheogen itself was coined in the early 80s by a group of academics to distance the culture from the stigma of the word psychedelic. And entheogens is sort of more targeted towards plant-based medicines and sacramental usage of psychoactive plants. And ayahuasca is predominantly amongst those plants getting a lot of media attention at the moment, precisely because of its ability to heal. Ayahuasca is legal in many parts throughout South America and even in the world as in the grey areas of the law. But it has the tradition. It has thousands of years of usage in the Amazonian basin. It has the traditions around it. It has the container of the ceremony. and of the central role of the shaman or the curandero. And so it's not just the ayahuasca, it's actually this sense of legacy and of the elders of the tribes of the earth and of the caretakers of the land who are bringing back the knowledge of ayahuasca. And there are many, many different other substances like psilocybin mushrooms, Salvia divinorum, peyote, San Pedro cactus. All of them are on the rise, but ayahuasca is sort of getting the media attention. And I think that's because it has so many safeguards within it. It can't be used recreationally, not easily, because it is such a purgative and a... you vomit.
Such a party foul. Can you imagine? Your friends would say, I can't take you anywhere. All you do is projectile vomit when we're just trying to have an all-night dance party.
Well, that brings up a really interesting point, because a lot of the Western contact with mind-altering substances has been recreationally, or it has been in the context of something like the 60s with LSD or man-made chemicals, which are very, very different from the plant-based entheogens. The plant-based entheogens, like ayahuasca, demand not just your respect, but they demand a relationship. They demand you to give something of yourself. And we're so used to in the West this idea of medicines that a doctor gives us, like a pill, and you take that and the pill does all the work. You just sit back and this medicine will make you better. Ayahuasca doesn't make you better on its own. Ayahuasca, in concert with the diet and with going into cleansing and to removing yourself from your world and focusing on your problems and your issues, ayahuasca opens up your own potential for healing. They've done recent studies with MRI scans and EEG scans, and they've discovered that ayahuasca, as well as other psychedelics, turn off the default mode network of the brain, these clustered regions of the brain which are involved with the sense of identity and ego and making us who we are on this level of consciousness. And when those are switched off, it's actually our own brain that is opening up, our own mind that is opening up to reveal the capabilities it has within itself and to connect to larger facets of being. And so ayahuasca often, engages your own subconscious and unconscious in your conscious mind, and it asks you where your problems are. Like, you engage in a dialogue, but it forces you to see yourself, and it doesn't do the work on its own. And so it's very unlike the Western understanding of medicines. A lot of the indigenous people, when they say la medicina, when they say medicine, they mean something different from what we understand it in West. They mean it's just organism. In plant, it's not just a neurochemical. There is a spirit or an aliveness, a being in the plant, and that is the being that we have to establish a relationship with on our spiritual level. So it's not just a flat sort of Western Henry Ford assembly line of chemicals. It's something that you need to engage with in a spiritual level. And that is beyond the Western paradigm, but it is fast coming into the Western understanding, this idea of spirituality, not just as an airy-fairy hippie thing, but as a level of being on how we can practice and sharpen and tune into it, and how we engage with our spirituality for our health and our well-being.
It's kind of interesting how you described ayahuasca and the relationship with plant medicines and how it's so different from the psychedelic drugs of the 60s, for example. So often when I speak to people about ayahuasca, the very first question that I receive is usually, is it anything like LSD? And, if I were to describe the difference between LSD and ayahuasca, I'd almost kind of say that, for me, LSD shows you the exuberant potentiality of things, like the broad horizon of, expansive, inclusive, potentiality and human existence. Whereas, with ayahuasca, it will show you that, but it'll also show you what you need to work on in yourself in order to move in that direction. And one thing that I see with LSD, and I'm sure that this experience is very different for different people, but for me, I kind of feel like, I see, when I have experienced LSD, I see, wow, anything's possible. We can totally do this, and then the next day, it's kind of like, okay. Like, it seems like it's so far away from, where I might be at that moment. Whereas with ayahuasca, it almost, always shows me, okay, this is the direction you want to go, that field of, infinite possibilities. But it's like, okay, these are the things that are blocking you or keeping you from moving in that direction. Here's where you're stuck. Here's where you need to release, what you need to let go of, and and what you need to change. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are on the differences between ayahuasca and LSD from your experience.
Well, there's an interesting cluster of ideas around this, but essentially LSD has been scientifically proven to be an amplifier. And so what it does is it amplifies the senses, and even in the psychoactive sense, you're getting more of an experience, but you're getting, a saturation, a deepening of colors and of nature and of perception and time dilation. But you're still essentially that consciousness. You're still essentially your consciousness altered and perhaps deepened and more. On ayahuasca, it's very different. It's more inward bound, and it's more exploratory of your own unconscious and your own emotional being and your own journey through life. And it does seem that there is a spirit with ayahuasca, and there is sort of a mythology that is arising around ayahuasca as it's incorporated back into the West. In indigenous countries in Peru and through South America, they often call ayahuasca madre, or the mother or the grandmother. And there seems to be this energy, a feminine energy around it, and a spirit in ayahuasca. That can be true, or it may be some type of projection from the unconscious. But essentially, in that relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca, and there does seem to be some type of presence there, which is not present with LSD, it seems that the plant spirit is wanting to engage with us and wanting to work on behalf of us for our healing. And it seems that the spirit of ayahuasca is an avatar in some sense for the earth herself, and, for Mother Earth and Gaia as a concept. And it seems that many of the entheogens are working to heal. They're healing plants. They're not just random psychoactives which are used recreationally. They are specifically designed to be taken to either physically heal or to reconnect us to the web of life. And in reconnecting us to the web of life, they heal the spiritual lack or the disconnect that we have been feeling. Now, the original Latin for religion is to reweave or to reconnect. And it makes us ask the question, what are we reconnecting to? We're reconnecting to the original matrix, which is the planetary matrix of Mother Earth, who, both feeds and creates and destroys, and has a level of spirit and awareness and intelligence to nature herself in what she creates, how the species interact and cooperate together, and how the web of life unfolds as one organism. Now, you may have those type of mental understandings on LSD, but it is quite rare to have those type of spiritual connections and those type of, workings on the body to, as you say, clear the blockages. And when the blockages are cleared through modalities like ayahuasca, what is really connecting then is our own innate ability, our bodies and our chakras and our energy systems to plug back into the planetary matrix and to be whole. And that is what to be healed means. It doesn't mean that you get anything more than you have, but it means you have full optimal capabilities of the human body, the human energy system, and the human soul. And then to remember what that really means and how that plugs into nature, I think is part of the great learning of ayahuasca. And it's that coming full circle back to the garden and back to the great green womb where we all began.
I really appreciate your thoughts on that, because I would say that, in my experiences with LSD, I didn't really feel the presence of a guiding, teaching, healing plant spirit at all. I would agree that, for me, the experiences with LSD were really, can also be really therapeutic and healing, but it was much more of an amplifier. It definitely seemed much more in the intellectual realm rather than in the full body healing realm, within which ayahuasca works so well. And, it's kind of interesting because, one of the things that I see in the, global, international, neo-shamanic world is, a tendency towards psychonautism, so to speak, when working with mind-expanding substances and even some of these power plants. And, one of my favorite books is a book by Daniel Pinchbeck called Breaking Open the Mind. And I kind of see his book, it's almost like a biography of my life in a certain way, but just different. I'm like, wow, this person kind of led a parallel life to me. And, some of the realizations that he received were very similar to the shamanic journey I've been on. But one thing that I noticed was that his book was really psychonautically focused, kind of like oriented towards what extreme dimensional realms can you, go to, can you access, through your, consciousness exploration. And for me, I personally don't think that that's the point of it, really. I kind of feel like, for me, the point of working with power plants, working with mind expanding entheogenic medicines is much more so a journey inward, a journey back to the earth, not a, how far into the outer world can you get, but like how much can you return to Mother Earth? And feeling or recognizing our place in the intrinsic, infinite web of life. And I think that's for me, it's been a much more grounding and holistic experience.
I think you're very right. When I first went down to Peru 8 years ago as a journalist, experiential journalist, documenting ayahuasca culture and this resurgence in interest from Westerners going down, a lot of the curanderos or the shamans that I interviewed and spoke to said that there is a identifiable target market of people that are going down for physical healing, but the vast majority of Westerners did not have physical ailments, but they sensed en masse that there was something missing, and there was sort of a spiritual malaise or this sense of disconnection, this sense of not belonging, or that there was something more, and that they were lacking this sense of spirit, this sense of something that they could believe in and connect to and be nurtured by in their lives. Because Western culture is often reductionist and mechanistic, and doesn't cater to that. So when people are learning that reconnection with things like ayahuasca, it's about not focusing just on the mind, because the ego is an amazing tool, but the ego will adapt and it will commodify anything that comes at it. So if shamanism and entheogens and psychedelics start to come back into the Western mind frame, the danger is the ego will go, oh yeah, okay, yes, we can work with this, and we can use them almost as psychedelic armoring, and we can take on board these tools without really changing. And what needs to happen, I believe, in the world at the moment, is this great rebalancing is going on, and we're learning how to re-engineer our consciousness to be sustainable again, to be sustainable in the web of life, as a culture within ourselves, within a society, but also with the planet. And to do that, we have to come out of the dominator culture headset, and we have to come back into a heart space. And what ayahuasca and the entheogens are helping us do is not just intellectually explore inner dimensions and the shamanic paradigm and the intergalactic cosmos type of deal. They're really bringing us down to not just our own healing, but our own heart space. When I was in the ayahuasca retreats that I led in just last September, I worked with a curandero called Percy Garcia, and he is such a heart-based practitioner, and he spent so much time with us trying to make us understand it's not about the head. When you're in these realms, how you navigate is through the heart. You navigate through the realms of the heart and how you feel. It's about feeling and intuition and the subtle energies which, to a large degree, the West has forgotten or shut down or atrophied or just not supported. Because so much of our culture is intellectually and aggressively driven towards conquering and action and outcome. We're forgetting that we need to relate to people. We need to relate to ourselves, to our own needs, to our family's needs, to the tribe and society's needs, and to the planet's needs. And so the great thing I think we are in need of healing in the West is we have a heartache. We have a heartache that many of us are recognizing, and to a large degree, the powers that be are still not recognizing. They refuse to acknowledge the fact that we have a broken heart in the West, and it's our relationship with Mother Earth, our mother, and nature, and how we be sustainable that we need to heal this relationship from. And the entheogens and ayahuasca can help us remember that we have a heart, how to use that heart, and how to connect with each other. And that is part of the great healing, I think, which is underway in the world at the moment.
In our conversation so far, you have brought up the term entheogen and psychedelic a number of times. And one of the things that I encounter is, a lot of people don't really know what entheogen actually means and what the difference is between the two. So I'd love if you might explain your understanding of either term.
Yeah, well, originally, as I was saying at the start, it was a term coined in the 80s to distance itself from psychedelics, but entheogen is from the Greek and it means to invoke the divine within. And that can be a contentious sort of term, in the West, because people don't believe in a divine to a large degree, or some people do, but they have, brand recognition and brand control over whose divinity means what. But, essentially it's saying that there is a divine spark within us, and that these entheogens are substances which reconnect us to that divine spark in ourselves and in nature. And as I was saying with the scientific discoveries of late with the MRI and the EEG, how they're discovering it turns off these parts of the brain, I think when we turn off those intellectual parts of the brain, what we're reconnecting to is that emotional part, or that bit within. We're looking within and we're finding that we are divine. We do have this spark of life. We are created with this purpose and with this spirit within us, and we hunger for authentic connection to other people and other spirit, and, to be fed by great spirit. And so psychedelic, which I still feel is a very valid term and is coming back to a large degree within the global push for the medicalization of psychedelics, it's essentially still referring to man-made chemicals like LSD and MDMA, which they're using. Organizations like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, pioneering lots of legal tests at the moment with doctors around the world for helping treat Iraqi war veterans who have PTSD with MDMA,
helping
or
treat
LSD.
Iraqi war veterans with MDMA?
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done with legal psychedelics in medical case studies at the moment. They're using LSD for cluster headache alleviation, and for psilocybin for cancer patients with anxiety, and late terminal patients with alleviating their fear of death. They're utilizing psychedelics in the medical establishment, which is very good and very well. And ayahuasca is also being used in a lot of clinical studies as well. But there's also a larger potential, again, not to intellectualize these substances just as commodities that can be reduced down to a pill like an aspirin or, something like that. Is that there is a process at work, both with the psychedelics and the entheogens, where it's moving us and it's engaging with us on a deeper level. And to use them just as medicines on a physical level is to ignore the fact that a lot of the problems around health start from a spiritual core. They start from a spiritual center. And if we're not centered in our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with the earth, and where we get our food from, where we're getting our energy sort of intake from, then that will result in dis-ease or being out of center. So psychedelics is still a very valid term, is what I'm getting at. And essentially they do relate to the man-made chemicals where entheogens invoke the divine within. Psychedelics was coined in the 50s by Humphrey Osmond and others. From the Greek, it meant to manifest the mind. And so there again is this difference between the mind, which is very much an egoic construct and very much a Western thing. We have incredible amount of mind expansion in Western culture at the moment. Since the 1960s, like 50 years on from some of the first wave of the LSD exploration, we have now, non-linear social networks, distributed consciousness, cloud computing. We are all on screens, and we're fragmenting our consciousness, and we understand what it means to sort of timeshare and to split our consciousness in many ways. There is a whole medicalization, of people that are on many different substances, especially in Western countries like the US. People are basically in altered headspaces everywhere. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it is healthy or that it's for the best outcome. But we almost understand mind manifesting is just the mind. But the plants and the entheogens are asking us to go deeper. They're asking us to go down to a heart-based level and to understand that there is this divine within, or this spark of life, or essentially a soul, something which is more than just the mind involved in the dynamic of being human, and how we have right relationship and interact with what we are embedded in, which is another organism, a macroorganism of planet Earth.
So why did you make your film Aya Awakenings? What inspired you to take on this endeavor? Because it's a lot of work to make a film and a lot of resources, and want to understand what your goal is with this documentary.
Well, it goes back to the start of my journey with ayahuasca, which was in 2006. I went down to the Amazon to write an article. It was a freelance article about this rise in global shamanism and the interest of Westerners in ayahuasca. And that became the book, Aya Awakenings, A Shamanic Odyssey. And there was so many, I had incredible, profound experiences of my own. I drank with over 24 different curanderos or shamans. And I basically tried to map the territory of what was happening in Peru and around the Western interface, this mashup of cultures between old world and new, what the supply and demand of shamanism meant, what was happening with the Western money coming in and buying the spiritual experience, and what people were getting out of that. And I interviewed all the curanderos, I interviewed all these Westerners, I had my own experiences. And so much of that was so profound and transformative for me that in making the book, eventually a few years after the book came out, we had the opportunity to make a documentary adaptation of the book. And so that began with the director and editor and my partner, Tim Parrish, who I've worked with creatively for over a decade. And he was the one who instigated the work on the film. And what we've attempted to do in the film, and I think we do it quite successfully, is we're using the narration from the book, and it's a very truncated, overarching, it's sort of like the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. There's an initiation, departure, initiation, and return. And we take the narration from the book to give people an emotional anchor and the experience and explain what ayahuasca is. And then we have the visionary component. We have a lot of video that we've shot and we've sourced. And we explain what the ceremonies are like with ayahuasca and with the shamans, that then we go in on the interior journey into the terra incognita, or the invisible landscape of the mind. And we've used some quite cutting-edge algorithms and software to recreate some of the effects and visionary components that people see on ayahuasca journeys. And many, many people that have seen the film have said that it is the closest thing you can get to an ayahuasca experience on the inside by watching this film. So I like to think it's a shamanic artifact in that we've taken the narration from the book, which was from the raw experience with the emotional narrative, the visionary video experience, and the incredibly intricate soundscapes with the Icaros, or the powerful shamanic medicine songs of the shamans, and the soundscapes of the jungle, and it synesthetically combines to become something greater than some of its parts. So it's basically a catalyst. When you watch this film, it catalyzes a reaction in the viewer that is, you cannot help but be affected by it. It's a very powerful film. And so in some way, I feel like we've trapped a little bit of the essence of the experience in the film to make it come alive again. And so in that way, it's not just talking about ayahuasca. It takes people on a first-person journey into the Amazon, into the heart of consciousness itself. So it's a very valuable cultural artifact to be sharing with the global tribe.
Wow, that's fantastic. I can't wait to watch it. There's so many moments where I kind of wish I could step into my mind and take some digital photos of some of the things that I've seen in the ayahuasca visionscape. One visionary artist who I think really captures the visionary realms so well is Alex Grey. And it's kind of interesting when I look at his paintings, I can tell which ones are ayahuasca visions and which ones were something else. But I would say that some of the things that some of the work that I've seen him come out with looks so much like some of the visions that I've experienced myself. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have done with the.
It's a very good point, and people like Alex Grey, who is the great godfather of the visionary art movement, and there is a movement of hundreds of artists worldwide now. And the difference between a normal, surrealist artist and a visionary artist, I guess, in this sense, like Alex Grey, there's other ones like the Peruvian Andy Debonardi.
Oh, he's wonderful, yeah.
Yeah. Android Jones has done
he's my favorite. Yeah. Oh, my God. Well, it's hard to choose. They're all so good.
What they are doing is that they are having visionary experiences with entheogens or however, endogenously, and they are encountering either entities or projections, but they're in realms which are valid consensual realms that medicine people and shamans across the world say, look, this realm exists. There is more than just this physical dimension. Basically, they're saying the web of life extends onto the astral and onto larger planes of existence. And it is a science. It is the science of curanderismo. And when these artists go in, like what we've done in the film, is that they are mapping the territory and they are bringing back the images and anchoring the experience in a similar way almost to what the Aboriginal Australians do with their dot matrix paintings. They say that they're not representing the landscape, they are capturing the landscape in a way that comes alive. And it's almost like holographic. So when these visionary artists anchor this material, when people see it, they're seeing something which is a catalyst and a trigger. And it's giving us a cultural artifact in the West to understand, because unless we have a vocabulary and an understanding of the potential of these realms, then they're invisible to us. And so the more we can see them and share them and trade you don't have to believe they exist, but to understand conceptually that they could exist is the first step to integrating, and for this generation to step into those realms and to learn how to map and to navigate them, to reclaim the invisible landscape for our generation and our culture.
Do you believe these realms exist?
Undoubtedly. I've been to these realms many times, and it's an extension of nature. I don't believe there's anything esoteric per se about it. I think it's just that we have been eroded and denuded in the mechanistic universe since the Industrial Revolution or so, and we've forgotten this connection. And all of this rising global shamanism is pointing to not just the healing. Underneath the healing is the connection. And when you have a connection to spirit and to nature and the web of life, I mean, I just think that the bleeding edge technologies, are also leading us into the same direction as shamanism, whether that's, quantum physics or, advanced internet technologies or,
virtual
it's
reality,
like
maybe?
Virtual reality. I mean, okay, here's the thing. Originally, there's a few scientists which have coined this term. There's validated reality, there's virtual reality, and there's vegetal reality. And vegetal reality is the original matrix, and it's like plant broadband. The plants communicate amongst themselves using, the root systems and the mycelial networks under the ground, and they are a larger synergistic cooperative organism which exhibits full spectrum consciousness. It exhibits an ability for different species of plants and trees to synergistically communicate almost in a network. A lot of the understandings and terminology around the internet and around, the way that information can be contained and transmitted also applies to nature. And we're learning that as above, so below, these systems are very similar to each other. And I think that shamanism is a technology. It's the vegetal technology, plant shamanism, and it should not be discriminated against just because it was brought to us by indigenous people. This is still Western imperialism and still, colonialization, that we're saying indigenous people are savages, essentially, because their technology is less than ours. Well, hello, they can communicate at a distance, they can heal at a distance, they can do things that we are only catching up with. And we should be looking at their technologies and their abilities and, testing if they work, because this is the essence of science. Test it. Don't believe it. Try it. And if it works for you, decipher it. Incorporate it into your vocabulary, into your scientific paradigm, because this is what the new paradigm is. It's a reclamation of the archaic revival and of the Western knowledge base and technology, so we have a sustainable future. It's the old and the new coming together into the now.
So what was the most visionary, out-of-this-world experience that you've had? How did it affect you, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I'll give you the most visionary experience. I've had many levels of visions, and you've got to understand as well that the Westerners in general are very enamored with visions, because this is, again, the mind wanting to know and to see. And we mentioned virtual reality before. It's almost as if that in the West, we don't believe things unless we can see them. If you can feel them, it's not enough. You think it's like hallucination. But if you can see them, you think there's something there. So a lot of the visionary component of the ayahuasca experience may be projections from the subconscious, codified into a visionary archetype that is speaking to you and meaningful to you. I've had those type of archetype things happen. I've seen the classic jaguars. I've seen ancient peoples. I've been interstellar journeys. But what we document in the film Ira Awakenings was a very specific encounter with a deeper level of reality. And it wasn't through using the modality of ayahuasca. It was actually smokable 5-MeO DMT. which was used by a shamanic practitioner in the jungle at the time. And in that experience, it was I underwent the classic white light tunnel experience that many people report who have had near-death experiences. This sort of feeling of, the lower bardos transcending to a great reservoir of primal consciousness, or what you could call the source. It's felt to me like I call it the Super Hadron Collider of hyperspace. It was really a vast realm, again, where it's not about seeing, because essentially it was an incredible expanse of white light with subtle variations in a tunnel oscillating effect. But emotionally and intuitively and vibrationally, my energy body was being read like a laser in a CD, reading a CD, and the information stored in me was merging my wavefront with the source. And what I understood from that intuitively, and this is what we all put our own words onto it, when you have a mystical, transcendental experience, it is very personal to you. It doesn't mean that it's not true, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but we need to develop our own language and understanding and contextualization of it. And it just seemed to be that in this experience, I had this overlap and merging with the Godhead, which I would consider the source. And it's very close to what they say when the drop rejoins the ocean. But here's what I learned from it. It felt like there was larger scales of larger rhythms at work, wherein basically almost like the condensation cycle of moisture in nature, that when the drop comes down and rains and hits the ground and then goes back up again, there's this eternal return. There's this eternal mystical return back to whence we came. And in that place, I melted into oneness of unity consciousness with the source. But I did it consciously every second of the way, and I was opening and it was reading me and I was reading it, and I was remembering that I was it and it was me. And what I learned from it was that the entire journey of our lives, we build up an electrical spiritual charge from every action we do, every thought we have, every kindness, every hurt, every step on our life path affects our energy body, and we store these charges as memories, as traumas, as experiences, but they have a vibrational register. And when I was merged back into the vibrational, docking port of the Godhead, it was absorbing, and in some sense you could even say eating or taking in all my meanness, all my memories. And what I got from that is that the web of life continues, and on a cosmic inner space level, I believe that the source incarnates on the explicate level down here as form for a reason, and that the culmination of our life's path is essentially to feed the source. I mean, the source is a perpetual engine of creation, creating and growing, and it grows through incarnating, and then our incarnation goes back in the cycle of life and feeds the Godhead. It was this beautiful reciprocal experience that was the most profound experience of my life, and it was captured on the exterior flesh body in the film Aya Awakenings, and we have recreated the interior visuals as closely as we could to take you on that journey. So I invite you to watch the film Aya Awakenings, and you'll get a deeper understanding of what I'm talking about.
Fantastic. So we've about reached the end of our time together. I'd love to ask you, Rak, how can we best stay in touch with you?
I'm all over social media. You can find me on www.rakrazam.com. That's rakrazam.com. The website, as you mentioned at the start, aya-awakenings.com. And I've got Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts mainly in my name. So I'm very accessible, and I do I do connect with the Global Tribe quite regularly. I do a podcast show called In a Perfect World, which has a lot of interviews with leading consciousness researchers and shamanic figures. And I'm always looking forward to connecting with the tribe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and you have a beautiful day.
Thank you very much. Aloha.